you have the opportunity to introduce to Roger Gray and the combatant commands, the Department of Homeland Security and Partridge in a Pear Tree, what your capability is. And then, if they're interested in it, you may get some opportunities. Now, we had Roger presented at the one last time. We had another energy company, American Wind, that within 30 days after presenting in August was over in Thailand conducting a demonstration of its capability. So we're going to do that again. It's going to be in June. We're going to start soliciting for small businesses. We're looking to select 6 energy small businesses with the solicitation coming out sometime around the end of January or 1st of February. And Paul, raise your hand, was really instrumental in helping with us last year and will be helping again. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Jerry. I want to point out what's going on up front here to everyone. We have had a request to broadcast these events, virtual, social media, live cast, for people who aren't in Huntsville, because there's a lot of information and knowledge going on in Huntsville, Alabama, that the rest of the world would benefit from hearing. So we're experimenting with different ways to do that, and Ruchi and Nexus Energy have volunteered to take the point on that, and as members and partners in Energy Huntsville, we appreciate it. And then the reverse will also be true. At some point, instead of broadcasting our knowledge out, we'll be broadcasting knowledge in the form of virtual speakers. So next year is going to be an exciting year, folks. It'll be interesting to see who we can get on the other end when we have the whole world to choose from. Paul Robinson. There you go.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Paul.
Hope you all looking forward to the holidays. I am. Mine starts today. Woohoo! All right. Hey, so I wanted to share a couple of things with you all, just things that are going on. And I've had a lot of people ask me here in the order of the last month or so, what's going to happen in the renewable space with the new administration. And to be quite honest, my guess is as good as yours. But I'll give you at least some of the chatter that I hear and some of the things that I see, and I think that I think will materialize. And one is the third-party finance space. Mike Pence was a big third-party finance guy up in Indiana. He did a lot of third-party finance. And, it was funny, as I was going to Austin, which we were talking about Austin, the conference, I was reading an article about, how the administration wants to really use the private sector for renewable energy, not just for renewable energy, but private investment, right? Third-party financing with leveraging other people's money. And so I think that's, I think that at least from the discussions we're having, I think that we have an opportunity really to expand it, move it forward. Was talking to DOE, and one of the things that we feel in the ESPC space, for example, is that the ECMs and the statutes in terms of using third-party finance really support a more robust ability to execute third-party finance, as opposed to limiting ourselves to just ECM. So, there's some discussion going forward about, hey, this may be an opportunity to open the aperture. So we'll see, but I think that the third-party finance space looks really good going forward. There was also something that came out recently in executive order. I think that we're looking at the renewable energy space, and not just in, DOD has certain goals. I think it's about 1 gigawatt across the services, the different services. But there's new language in there that actually moves producing 1 gigawatt of renewable energy for the federal civilian agencies. And so we're now talking about the other agencies such as Commerce, State, and all these that would actually have this goal of trying to meet renewable energy. And the challenge will be a lot of folks in the federal space, and especially in DoD, really leads the way. And I think they would eventually look to us to help them move that forward. So. The last point I would share is, there's an article you should be seeing. It's coming out. It'll come out of the White House on the actually the ESPC and third-party financing and meeting $4 billion over. It's 2 cycles now, so about four years. So that challenge of $4 billion was met just recently, and of that $4 billion, the Army did $1 billion of it. And Huntsville in itself did about 85% of that, so about 850 million over 4 years. So you'll see that article come out. I think it's a really good achievement in terms of the entire federal sector being able to leverage third-party finance.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Before you sit down, some people who may not know what your role is at the Corps, one, and two, because we're small businesses all over the place here, maybe you can share with this group how you see this new year coming relative to how the Corps can support small business.
Sure. No, I think that's so I was at a board meeting here at Energy Huntsville the other day, and we were talking about the way forward here in the next year and things that I wanted to achieve. But first of all, for those who don't know me, I'm the Chief of Energy over at the Huntsville Center. So a lot of the Army's energy programs will reside in Huntsville. So we're charged with execution of those programs on behalf of the Army and other customers that come to us to do that work. But the discussion we were having at the board really was about the way forward and what we wanted to do. And I've always felt strongly that we are the right folks to be to be the center of education and training. I mean, we see all the programs, they come in, we live them day in and day out. We know how to play these programs and utilize them effectively. And so we're rightly postured to do that. And so as I look forward to this year is really spending some time with Energy Huntsville, the local community. How do we leverage academia? How do we leverage energy? For example, the University of Huntsville, the DAU is here. How do we leverage the small businesses? And how do we find ways to work together that we can really do something that is a win-win-win, really across not just not just necessarily for us providing that content and education training, but how we can educate not just the federal sector but state and local communities, and how we can help businesses and small businesses going forward. So we're going to spend a lot of time. Portia, for those who don't know, Portia is my strategy branch chief, so she's charged with that. And we will be spending some time this year really trying to put some concepts together and how we can make all of that happen.
Thank you, Paul.
Recently, the OEI had an announcement about a focus on combined heat and power in the coming year. Could you give us any insight into how CHP is going to play here in the coming year?
Yeah, I think it's going to play a pretty prominent role. So there's discussion about CHP.
Paul, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, repeat the question.
Yeah, it's related to combined heat plant, right? And so what the Army wants to move forward, and I think that they're wanting to move much aggressively and putting some goals behind execution of CHP, right? And so that's the question. We've had discussions with the OEI, and we've had discussions with the headquarters department of the Army, and I think we're kind of in a stage of trying to get that together and to find out how much we want. And what the priority areas are. But Portia, do you remember the numbers that they were looking at in terms of CHP?
They were looking at doubling it in 4 years, I believe.
I thought it was like 50. I can't even remember the number.
50 million.
Was it 50 million? Yeah. So there's. I think the challenge is going to be, hey, how do we find a priority order? What's the pecking order? What are the ones that we need to do? And I think there will be more guidance. Any more you want to say on that, Portia, in terms?
That we have received any other guidance right now. There's a, I guess, high-level tiger team that's kind of looking at how they want to approach it, and that's kind of what we're waiting to get any direction and guidance from once this team meets and define how they want to move out.
Yeah, and what I would share with you is in terms of the execution of it, I would care to say that the OEI and Huntsville would be charged with doing that, just depending on the size. That would become part of the renewable portfolio that's out there. So I think that you would see that part added to the existing pipeline that we're trying to build at this point. So, any other questions?
We have Office of Energy Initiatives.
Say again?
Office of Energy Initiatives.
Office of Energy Initiatives, right, Washington, D.C. Okay.
Thanks, Paul.
Took longer than I thought, but
Thank you, Paul. I was hoping Dale Jobs would be here. Is Dale here? He put out an announcement last week. He owns a company called Sintel. They do operational energy with the Corps. Put an announcement last week that they are looking for a double E with grid experience. So if anybody knows anyone who's looking for a job in those lines, there's an opening, and It's always nice when you can stand up in front of a professional audience and actually advertise a position as opposed to advertising your own availability. Before we go into the speaker today, I'd like to go around the room and do the first timers, visitors. Do we have any over here? Over here? Go ahead.
Judith Jones, worked for Compass in Huntsville, not the bank. We're an engineering firm. Our core business has been trusted consultant advising. We've mainly been in the the geospatial sector, but with some things we're doing, partnering with a local company and also looking, talking with Dr. Carswell, we're looking more in the energy sector. So we're here trying to become more conversant. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Anybody else over there? Okay, let's come over here. Any first timers, any students? Go ahead.
Randy Johnson, Johnson Energy Solutions, a small energy consulting company out of Chattanooga.
Okay.
Eric Schmidt, I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Chattanooga, and we're involved in the Better Buildings Challenge and interested in seeing how you guys are getting things done down here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. I hope you find this to be valuable. And always, nothing's complete until we thank our sponsors. And speaking of sponsors, Dr. Barnhart just showed up. He's based in Rocket Centers, CEO, Honeywell. Honeywell's here. And then the titanium, gold, and silver sponsors. We appreciate everything and any participation we can get. This has grown quite a bit in the last year, and I think that's a testament to all the work that everyone in this room has done. Would you like to say a few words about energy?
You know, we're kind of turning our sights right now to 2019. You know, the 50th anniversary of the moon landing is going to bring the eyes of the world to Huntsville, literally. And there are many committees working on it already. We think we're going to try to focus on July 16th as the big day in Huntsville, because that was launch day, and that's our specialty. And I don't think we have a chance in hell, frankly, of getting a lot of media here on the 20th. So I think it will start the story, which is appropriate for us to start that story and bring attention early in the week to Huntsville. So combined with the bicentennial, we are inviting the entire Alabama legislature to Huntsville in the spring of 19 to have them kick off the 200th year of Alabama governance at the downtown facilities where they actually met 200 years ago at Constitution Village. So there's a lot happening in 2019. It sounds like, well, why are you thinking about that? But it's only 24 months away. And I think if we could shine and show during that period of time when the world is once again going to be looking at Huntsville, that we are so much more than just propulsion and defense, I think it's going to be a golden opportunity for us. Rocket Center is deeply engaged in trying to get more facilities constructed so that we can have a showcase for energy. We are 100% committed to the energy story, to helping people learn, to implementing energy measures at the Rocket Center in an old 46-year-old brownfield facility that will show the world what can be done when you put your mind to energy. So please call on us, help us, coach us, tell us what you think, give us your ideas, and come and participate with us as we bring energy to the forefront when the world comes to Huntsville again.
Thank you, Dr. Barnhart. And for those of you who don't know, she's quite sincere. She really would like to hear good ideas and how they can make this a real national, global showcase of energy. Are there any announcements? Any more go-arounds? Well, it's a slow time of year. Not really a whole lot to talk about at this point. So I think we'll go ahead and start into their speaker for the day. Bob Starling.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming out today. A little on the chilly side, but we are towards the end of December. We got to expect it to be a little chilly. Who saw the snow Sunday? All right. A few of you did. That's right. You had to be a first. So now I know which ones of you get a first. All right. It's amazing what you can find out by asking a few questions, isn't it? Speaking of questions, or comments, I just wanted to say thank you for your support to Energy Huntsville this year. We've had 12 programs this year, Bill did not let me off the hook as his program manager. I wound up, usually we have 11, but this year we had 12 if you count the summit, and I'm counting it because it makes the numbers look better. But we do. We have a great speaker today. Dr. Hoagland is going to be talking today from TVA. And we are already launching into 2017. Now, Dr. Barnhart, we're not quite as far ahead as you are with your planning, but we're moving in that direction. So my plan is to always try to stay 3 months ahead with speakers and programs. That way everybody knows what's going on. We see what's happening, and there's not any real surprises, to maybe right at the last minute, and that's always possible. Let me tell you very quickly, we're going to start off with a presentation in January on microgrids. Snyder Electric's going to bring that in. We're going to be followed up a little later in the year with solar energy. We're going to have a presentation on that by Greg Cox. And we've already heard about the other transactional authority, OTA, speaker that's coming up in April. So we're moving out. We've already got some things. If you have a topic that you are interested in having presented, see me or Bill, and we'll be glad to work with them. I'll be glad to take a lead and run it down. Bill will tell you I do that. That's kind of my job, and we'll make things happen. Having said that, let's move on into today's program and get started. Today's speaker is Dr. Joe Hoagland. He is the Vice President for Enterprise Relations and Innovation at TVA. Joe, I'm not even sure I've got a name tag long enough to put all that on there. But that just begins to touch the surface of things that Joe's been involved in. And I was sent a wonderful bio that I'm not going to go through the whole thing because we take about an hour and a half to finish that. And I don't want to take Joe's time up. Well-earned points, but Joe has a BS degree in chemistry from Southern Utah University and Master's of Science and a doctorate degree in physical chemistry from Washington State University. He's a smart guy, okay? I just got a master's in engineering, but never got that doctorate degree. I thought about it for about 5 minutes after I got my master's. But I decided at my age I probably didn't need to go there. Joe is the Vice President of Enterprise Relationships and Innovation at TVA's designated federal officer for both the Regional Energy Resource Council and the Regional Resource Stewardship Council. He's responsible for strategic engagement of stakeholders around various issues, including TVA's energy resources, TVA's natural resource stewardship. That's an interesting mix, and I can see how they would go together, and other key issues. In addition, Dr. Hoagland directs TVA's strategy on technology, innovation, research, development, and implementation to improve TVA's power system. Please welcome Dr. Hoagland to the platform.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I appreciate everybody coming out on this cold, almost Christmas morning. It was kind of interesting sitting there listening to some of the announcements this morning because I'm going to touch on several of the things I think folks were talking about. It's a pretty incredible time in the utility industry, and I think it's just getting started. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I have a few slides just to tee up some ideas, but I'm going to mostly just talk. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide.
There you go.
All right, so, at the beginning of every talk, I have the obligatory, TVA slide. So, but this slide's kind of important to where we're talking about with where energy's going, because TVA's mission is really about serving the people of the Valley, both in terms of providing energy, taking care of the environment, and economic development. And economic development, I think, is very important as we think about how the grid is going to evolve and the role that TVA plays in that, not only in helping to bring more business, more jobs to the Valley, but also how we protect the consumers of the Valley as things grow. We have low rates, we have good reliability in all of our electricity that we provide. And as these new technologies come on, we have an obligation to make sure that those low rates and that high reliability is maintained for everybody. The end result of which makes everybody's life better, and it helps with economic development. So when I was here before, I think I've shown this picture. I used to call this today's power grid. You can see we've marked that out. But you know, traditionally, just as a reminder, the grid system has always had large central station generation plants, everything from coal, nuclear, more recently gas, hydro, fed electricity out onto a transmission system. That transmission system went to a distribution system. In the case here in Huntsville, that would be Huntsville Utilities. And then, of course, to everybody's homes and businesses. It's a great system. It's worked for 80 plus years, but it's changing. And it's changing, I think, for a lot of good reasons. So that change is beginning to push now resources onto the demand side. Traditionally, that really started out in the energy efficiency space, started out in the demand response space. I actually was responsible for energy efficiency at TVA for a while. It was really funny how you go in and talk to people and say, I'm going to tell you why you don't need to buy my product. It's a bit of an odd thing, and it's especially odd when you go to the boardroom and explain to the executives why you don't want people to buy your product, since that's how we make money. But that kind of really was where distributed resources began. Coming on to that was demand response, which is your ability to either reduce demand, the amount of power that's being used at a particular time, or increase demand potentially at a time when you may need more. TVA actually really thought about that on a big scale decades ago. At one point, good news or bad news, you may remember I talked about when I was here before that TVA actually at one time was building 17 nuclear plants, which are all baseload plants, which means they're going to run, they don't go up, they don't go down. And so at the same time, TVA was going to build 3 pump storage facilities across the valley. We ended up with now 6 nuclear units, and we've got 1 pump storage facility, which is at Raccoon Mountain. But the whole purpose in that pump storage facility was what I would call very large-scale demand response. It allowed us to store energy at night using the water, use it during the day when we needed it. But now, today, the technology has gotten so good in demand response that it goes all the way down to an individual household, right? You can actually look at water heaters, you can look at air conditioners and those kinds of things and be able to turn them on and off depending on what the peak load looks like. And I'll come back and talk a little bit more about the impacts of that in a few minutes. And then that has led more recently into distributed generation, right? People are now being able to put on solar panels. We talked about combined heat and power, I think a minute ago, microturbines. Fuel cells are still sort of there. I mean, you folks in the space industry, you've got fuel cells down, but we're still not quite there in the home, and probably has something to do with the cost, but I think we'll get there eventually. But in the process of all that, as you can see in this picture, it's no longer just about us, right? It used to be we make the energy decisions. It used to be, in fact, somebody used to ask me, said, well, how did you get public input? I said, it's really good. People would come to us and they'd say, we think you should do this. And we'd go, okay, that sounds really good. And then we'd go do whatever we wanted to. And that wasn't just TVA, that was the utility industry in general, because in that large system, we were the ones making all the large scale investments. We were the ones building the large power plants and building the systems. And there's still some very strong value in all of that. And as you'll see as we go through that, I don't think that goes away in the future. But the fact is that consumers, other companies, other folks are now becoming much more engaged and have technology and opportunities to provide to customers. We'll go to the next slide.
Before, I have a question.
Okay.
2 megawatts.
Oh, a negawatt, yeah. So that's a term that's been coined, and it goes away and then it comes back and it goes away. But the idea, particularly in demand response, is can I, instead of having a megawatt, can I create a negawatt, right? And energy efficiency is probably the easiest example of that, right? Instead of actually seeing a demand, we make that demand go away. It makes our power planners, they don't like that word because it's hard for them to model that particular technology. All right. Okay, so what's driving the change? In my mind, there's kind of three big things. There are new technology, there's customer choice, and market dynamics. In new technology, the amount of change that's occurring is absolutely phenomenal at the technology level. I was actually at a meeting in Germany this year, and a technologist expert was talking, and he said, you need to think about this for a minute, but he said, think about the last century and think about how much technological change has happened in the last century. Then go back to when the space program began and think about the technological change that's happened since the space program began. And then he said, think about this. The technology since that space program began to today, that level of technological change will occur in the next 4 to 5 years. Now, that wasn't energy sector specific, but just thinking about, because I was a little kid when the space, but man, that was like the coolest thing ever. And I love it when I get to come down here because I get to see all this neat stuff that was created a long time ago. But if you think about all of that in just 5 years, right? And so the companies that are involved in this, not only are they changing phenomenally fast, but they have to figure out how to give you something you don't even know you want. So, perfect example, right? How many people's got one of these? Right? How many of you 8 years ago knew you needed one of these? And maybe even more importantly, how many of you would have a heart attack if this thing wasn't in your pocket? Huge amount of technological change and dependence. But now, and maybe somewhere unlike the space program where that was sort of an evolutionary change, a lot of things happened over time, these kind of changes are becoming what they call disruptive changes. And there's a number of companies that are creating these disruptive changes. I think they're good, mostly, but they are definitely fundamentally changing the world. So let's talk about it. Tesla. Anybody heard of Tesla before? So Tesla's created an electric vehicle, right? Anybody here have a Tesla? Nope, there we go, okay. So anybody here have Tesla's predecessors? Anybody got a Prius? Right? Prius, a little bit different than the Tesla, right? Not saying it's good or bad, although I'm a sports car person, so I like the Tesla. But the Tesla is a fundamentally different concept for a vehicle than what the Prius was. Underneath that Tesla is a battery system that is fundamentally different than what the original concept around batteries were. And that's all being driven by Tesla's hype, Tesla's money, and Tesla's push to effectively change the marketplace. The other thing, and probably most importantly what that Tesla has done, is it's made the car companies think different. Right? I mean, when the Prius is running around, it's like, yeah, okay, that's great, but we don't care. Right? Now I have a car that looks like a real car, drives like a real car, has the range of a real car. And so now the car manufacturers are beginning to really pay attention. Right? They're beginning to design cars that can compete with the Tesla. Now the interesting thing about Tesla, and this is purely Joe's opinion, I don't think Tesla will survive. Because when the real car manufacturers that have all that infrastructure, they know how to build a highly safe, highly sophisticated vehicle, catch up, Tesla won't be able to compete. But it won't matter, because Tesla will have fundamentally changed the way you think about vehicles and the way you care about vehicles. So now the energy industry, why do we care? Well, when I had Priuses, you know, somebody go home, plug them in at night. Okay, great, not a big deal. Or go to the Cracker Barrel and plug something in. Now I got a Tesla. And the current Teslas, I can still kind of go home at night and plug them in, and there's Tesla charging stations, and there's a few of them, and they're at about 75 to 150 kilowatts, depending on the generation. Well, now the real car companies are coming along, and these are the car companies who know exactly what it is you want to buy. And the car companies have said, oh, how long do you want to be in a gas station? Anybody want to be there longer than 5 minutes?
Yeah.
10 minutes? All right. How long does it take to charge your Prius, or your Tesla?
440, it's about 30 minutes.
Okay, 30 minutes. How many want to wait for 30 minutes? Now recognize we're in the 30 minutes to charge your car. If you think about that back in 1960, whatever, you'd be going, wow, that's the greatest thing ever, right? But in today's world, no. So Porsche's in the lead right now. They're looking at a 350 kilovolt charging station. Charge your car 80% in 8 minutes. And the reason they're doing that is because Porsche has always prided themselves on the customer experience. Everything about that car is about the way you feel about it. And they're convinced if they're going to go to an electric vehicle, you will be unhappy if you're waiting 30 minutes to fuel up your Porsche. Okay, so now why do I care about that? Well, okay, if I now start thinking about a charging station at 350 kilovolts, and you think of it kind of in a gas station concept, you know, like a Pilot station or a Waggles or something like that, and you got them all lined up, that's a 3 megawatt drop for us as a utility, right? Okay, so now who's getting changed, right? So now we're becoming changed, and so we're having to begin to think about what is the impact of that going to be, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the research we're doing on that. So, you know, and then in the middle of all that, Tesla's got these really cool batteries. So now they're wanting to take those batteries and actually use them to support the grid, or to back up solar, or to use for other things, which up until now, storage has been a really cool concept, but really expensive and not very efficient. Tesla's changing that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then one other thing I'll talk about is, I call them the Googles of the world. It's more than just Google, but Google's one of the ones that's out there the most, right? They're becoming pervasive in your home. They are wanting to manage everything there is to manage about your life. In fact, I was watching this morning on the news, the little Hey Google thing, right, that sits on your counter, right? Well, energy management is part of that, right? We're going to let you turn it on and off your lights. We're going to let you manage, you know, when your air conditioners comes on, when they go off. And so they're actually now becoming a force in actually managing and how load comes on and off of the grid, which I think, again, is a big change for us, because up until we can tell all of you exactly how you use power and why you use it. But now Google's going to change that. And other people like Google, because they're going to do what you want rather than what we would normally see people do. And that kind of leads me to the second point, which is about customer choice. Customers no longer, normally customers think about electricity when you turn the light switch on, when you turn the light switch off, and when you write that check that you send to the power company. Right? Beyond that, they don't, and they actually don't know. A company called eSource, which does a lot of research in customer experience, goes out across the country and tries to understand what customers know about electricity. They don't know anything. One of the most interesting ones I saw recently was most folks are willing to pay more for a Starbucks coffee than a day's worth of electricity, because they don't have a recognition of what electricity does for them, right? And that's bad on us as a utility, right? We've done a really good job in all this time of being in the background, and keeping the lights on, never letting them go off. But the end result is customers don't really understand what they're getting. So now these disruptive companies are coming along and saying, well, I'm just going to make your electricity experience a whole lot better. Now, side note here, for those of you in the electricity business, I don't ever want to experience my electricity, but that's my personal opinion. But they're creating situations now where people can really control their technology, and they want it. this thing has created a world where you get to have a say in everything and anything you do. And it's working. So a company just recently, actually out of the Netherlands, has created an app where you now pick your electricity and you buy packets. So instead of that monthly power bill where you do kilowatt hours and you all that stuff that makes no sense that you don't understand, right? They just have you buy packets. And you can buy a regular packet, which is sort of, and let me back up, it's a prepay basically is what it is. You're buying so many kilowatt hours of electricity ahead of time, but that's not how they advertise it, right? You buy a regular packet, which is normal electricity rates. You can buy a green packet, which is renewable. It's green, costs a little bit more, but it's a green packet. If you're a heavy industry or commercial that has a certain load shape, load factor, they have a packet for that. You can buy those. You can buy as many ahead as you want to. You can buy one at a time. They'll send you emails that says your packet's about up. Oh, by the way, if you buy another one, we'll give you a 10% discount. Right? You see that anywhere else when you're out shopping on the internet? Right? Guess how much customer satisfaction there is in that app? 98%. People absolutely love it. Now, when you go back into the bowels of the big utility, we go, huh? Why? What? Right? But that's because we're just really trying to understand the consumer and what the consumers really want and what they want to understand. And then that leads to the market dynamics for a minute. So, we were talking about solar a few minutes ago and what's going to happen in the Trump administration. And I've heard it all, everything from, everybody better hold on to their solar panels because they're going to get taken away to whatever, right? I don't think that's going to happen. And I also don't think it's going to happen because of the market dynamics. So I've got Walmart and Nike, FedEx up there. They all belong to a group called the RE100. They're actually up to I think the RE350 now. But there are a number of commercial companies who have set very specific goals for 100% renewable generation capacity by some date certain. So Walmart, as an example, I think they want 50% of all of their operations 100% renewable by, I think 50% by 2020 is their current goal. Sorry, 2025, they moved it out a little bit. And they're going to get that themselves, or they're going to get that working with the utilities. We're sort of agnostic. They actually want to work with the utilities because they do believe the utilities do know what they're doing, but they are going to get to that goal. And they're willing to invest the money, they're willing to invest the effort, they're willing to make sure that happens. Tax credit doesn't matter. The policies and regulations, the carbon regulations, all of that doesn't matter. And again, for us as utilities, we're kind of scratching our head and going, why? Anybody in here know why? Customers. That's exactly right. So, now don't get me wrong, Walmart is a very bottom line focused company, right? So if solar, for example, was massively expensive, I don't think they'd be going down this road. But solar now, particularly at utility scale, is cost effective. We personally, TVA can purchase solar power now at prices that are competitive with our normal price for power. So Walmart, they get the competitiveness, but now the customers, right? They need that to be able to tell the customers they're sustainable, they're green, they're providing the things that their customers want. Perfect example, talking with one of these companies, and I asked them, I said, well, this is not going to save you that much on your power bill when you put this in. They said, no, it's not. But we spend $1 billion a year annually on marketing across the world. Solar farm is a few $1 million out of that $1 billion. That's how they look at it. And oh, by the way, if the electricity bill goes down, that's okay too. That's not their driver. So the market dynamics are going to keep this clean energy going. I mean, I'm sure policies that happen in Washington are going to affect it some, and certainly here where there's a lot of government facilities, that will affect it some. But the overall market dynamics are really going to continue to push the technology. And I think right now there's 3 technologies that probably really stand out in this space. Solar at the community level or up to the utility level. Combined heat and power. 2 things have happened there. Natural gas prices have come way down and it doesn't look like they're going back up anytime soon. And the technology has gotten much better. And the last one is microgrids. Now, microgrids is an interesting one because when I go talk to customers and they tell me they want a microgrid, they really don't know what they want. I had one recently, in fact, that I said, oh, we had to come talk to them. They needed a microgrid. So I said, okay. And we sat down with them and said, okay, so tell me what you need. Well, they need better resiliency, right? And they need to be, survivable in a catastrophe and whatever. And they needed to be, I think they said 7 nines reliable, right? So I said, okay. So let me get this straight. You have a facility, and this is their facility, where they have 2 completely independent delivery points from us, which means completely separate generation source, separate circuit coming in. There's conditioning equipment on their side, there's conditioning equipment on our side. When all the smart people do the math, they have about 8 nines of reliability and resiliency. And we're like, oh, okay. So what do you want to do beyond this, right? And are you willing to pay the cost? Once we talked through all that, they kind of backed away. But as we begin to educate customers, we are beginning to realize, and they're beginning to realize, that, and it kind of goes back to this choice, they do want some say in how they manage the electricity, where it comes from, when they, if you're in a storm event or you're some other crisis event, they have the ability themselves to take care of the system. Where we've got to come in and where we're beginning to work with folks is making sure they understand what it means to, quote, take care of the system. I think I'd used this last time when I was here, is, if you want a microgrid, that's great, but if the world comes apart, right, you now got to go fix it, right? If you're relying on the utility, I think the quote I used was from a gentleman who said, his hardest problem after he called the utility was which bottle of wine was he going to drink while he was waiting for the lights to come back on. So, you have to think about what it is you're going, but they're really headed down that road. So you'll change the slide, I appreciate it. All right, so what are we doing for that? There's really 2 areas that we're heavily focused in. One is in technology innovation, one is in engagement strategy. In the technology innovation space, we are trying to think about, remember that picture I showed at the front, how do I create a new grid system where I've got interoperability between the things that are on the distributed generation side and the things that are on central station side, and how do I make that work? And that's coming in a bunch of different levels. Everything from how do I think differently about my traditional generation sources to how do I integrate and make the new technology work. So we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years with EPRI, with Oak Ridge National Labs and others on running a bunch of sophisticated computer models to say what happens to the grid system as I get more and more distributed generation on the system. And even more importantly, what happens when that generation is an intermittent resource. What I mean by intermittent resource is, if you think about solar, for example, right, works when the sun shines, it doesn't when the sun doesn't. And you don't have a choice as an operator about that. Same thing with wind. You get it when it blows, you don't when it doesn't. That changes the load and energy profile for us in fairly significant ways, particularly if there's large amounts of it. Right now, for example, if you think about a nice sunny afternoon, in the summertime, we would be generating a whole lot with our large central station generation sources. But if I got a whole lot of solar on the grid, that's when solar works. So I need those central generation resources to be doing something else. Well, that's a little hard for a nuclear plant or a 60-year-old coal plant or to be able to change. So the analysis we're doing with these computer models lets us know what we think those load shapes will change. That's now led to a number of projects in the nuclear and coal space to understand very fundamental things like materials analysis. And you say, okay, why do I care about materials analysis? Well, think about a coal plant, right? You heat everything up, boils water, it runs hot metal turbines. That's great as long as you keep it up. But as soon as I start cycling it up and down all the time, I now have metal fatigue issues and other operational issues that were never built into the original design. So we have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to do that. Nuclear plants just flat out don't want to change. When you reduce the power on a nuclear plant, you actually build up xenon and some other gases in the reactor core that you have to manage and bleed off. And if you don't do that correctly, it can end up causing problems for the reactor. So in general, the process has always been don't mess with it. But the reality is we may have to do that. We're also looking at, sort of more practical things like when I do maintenance and how I do maintenance. Right now, the best time to take a nuclear plant offline to do maintenance is in the shoulder months because I don't need all the energy. So that'd be in the spring or in the fall. If I got a whole lot of solar on, I probably need to take that nuclear plant off in the middle of the summer because I've got all that solar coming in to do my maintenance on the nuclear plant. Now, if you go tell a nuclear guy you're going to take his plant off in the middle of the summer, you'll want to know what you're smoking. Because that's just never been the way anybody's ever thought about that. And so that we have to think about on our system itself how those things change. Then we have to think about those intermittent resources as they come on our system. How do we manage those? Right now, if you go put a solar panel, for example, on the system, there's a set of interconnection requirements that says, a little bit about your inverter and how to interconnect, but most of the interconnection is focused around safety standards and making sure that there's interlocks in place so that, if the grid's down or we're doing maintenance or something, somehow you're not feeding power back to it so that somebody gets hurt. That's really great, but for the future, that's not going to be helpful. So we're doing, again, work with a number of folks trying to understand inverter technology. And, they coined the phrase the smart inverter. But it's really inverters that actually sense what's happening on the power grid and have the ability to react in real time and be able to change the dynamics of the solar that it's connected to, be able to change how it's reacting back to the grid. And there's two levels to that we as the utilities, as we evolve, we can use. The first one is maybe semi-smart, but it's inverters you can set parameters. You can set frequency parameters and voltage parameters, and if it gets outside those parameters, it shuts down, right? It trips out the solar. The ideal way and the eventual way is eventually we would actually like to control that in real time, but we got to be able to talk to it, right? So there's a lot of fiber going in a lot of places, a lot of good communication going in a lot of places. Eventually that'll get to the point where we can actually talk to every device out there, long ways away from that. Not just in the valley, but across the nation. Larger municipal areas, I think, have more of that, but as you get out into rural areas, that gets more complicated. So we're trying to figure out how do we make these technologies work, whether they've got that really super high level of communication or not. Then we're looking at the technologies themselves and trying to figure out where can they best benefit customers and where can they best benefit us. So CHP is a perfect example. The technology has gotten much better. Gas prices are much lower. How do we engage with that technology and how do we put it on the system? How do we put solar panels on the system? How do we deal with fuel cells? All of that, though, is driven by customer preferences. And so that kind of leads me to the last point on this slide, which is engagement with other folks, right? Remember I said a few minutes ago, in the old days, we used to ask everybody what they wanted, and then we kind of went and did what we thought was right for everybody. And that worked well for a long time. But now folks have different wants, which means we got to bring them into the conversation. And who is it that you have to bring into that conversation? We'd like to be there, obviously. Who else should be in that conversation?
Big users.
Users,
Big users, big.
providers, government folks, policymakers. Hey, everybody wants to be in the middle of that pot. And everybody has a point of view, and frankly, everybody has a pretty important point of view. And we have to figure out how to balance that. And that's actually one of the really important roles that I think TVA or any other large utility will continue to play in this whole mixture for a long period of time. And the reason I say that is, let's go back to some of those disrupting companies. You don't have to change, sorry. But why do you think they're in this business? Opportunity, which translates to making money, right? That's what they want to do, is make money. And don't get me wrong, if you're a company, I own my own small business, I get it. You making money is your goal. I'm sure many of you, that's your goal too. That's very important. But when we think about TVA's mission, or many other utilities in the valley and even other parts of the country, our mission is not to just make money. Our mission is really to help consumers, particularly those consumers that don't have the ability to help themselves. And so part of the role that we have to have in this whole engagement conversations is making sure we're balancing out the interests of the new technology companies with the interests and the values of the consumers and their ability to continue to be able to afford electricity. And in my mind, that's a slightly different position than you think about other companies, but also think about electricity. It's a slightly different commodity, right? Because for any of us, life doesn't happen without electricity, right? You can't function well in a society without electricity. So if you're of lower income, if you're in a position where you just can't be affected and afford all these new cool technologies, how do you deal with that? And I think that's a role that we have to play as we begin to think about how to engage folks and think about how to balance these new things. Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of these new technologies is going to be very beneficial to consumers, going to be beneficial to the overall grid. But we got to do it in such a way that we bring everybody along in the process. So we're spending a lot of time talking to people, trying to understand what consumers really want. Somebody told me the other day that TVA doesn't like solar. Actually, this morning I think I got told TVA doesn't like solar. That's not true. In fact, we just put in a solar plant just down the street here. What TVA doesn't like is paying a really high subsidy for a few people to get the value of the solar, and everybody else is paying for it, right? Now, as the technology gets cheaper, and it becomes more affordable, then I think that becomes even less of an issue. But today, rooftop solar, as an example, is still not cost competitive. Community solar is getting very close. Utility scale is definitely there. And so as you see us progress, we're not saying we don't like solar, we're not saying we don't like any of those technologies, but we're trying to protect those who can't protect themselves, and making sure economic development and jobs still happen in the valley. The one thing that we bring, I think, from an economic development standpoint is low cost, highly reliable electricity. That's what, and coupled with everything else the communities bring in the valley, that's how we get economic development. If we have evolution of some of these DERs that messes all that up from a cost and reliability standpoint, then we lose our ability to help economic development. Now that said, remember what I said earlier, the RE100 or 350 or whatever, they want clean, they want green, they want renewables. So from an economic development standpoint, we do have to figure out how to provide that, because they're not going to come here if they don't have the ability to get access to that. So it's a balancing act between all of these different folks, and we've got a number of stakeholder groups where I like to bring in everybody, because I hate having the conversation where it's TVA against the world. It's never very fun. But if I bring in consumers, and I bring in developers, and I bring in advocates, and I bring in policymakers and regulators, and I let them talk about the subject, it's kind of cool. Because what they find out is what I was just trying to describe to you all is this is complicated, and that everybody's interests have to be balanced, and that what my interests are and what your interests are not the same. We have it's not an energy example, but a great example of where I think TVA did that in the past, and that's with our river operations study guide. We brought everybody in, everybody that wanted really, had nice houses on the lake and wanted beautiful, high lake levels, all that great stuff. Brought in the fishermen, brought in the navigation people, brought in the, Corps, worried about flood control, all those different things, put them all in a room and said, okay, how are we gonna run the river? Took us 2 years of working through what lake levels would be, what flow rates would be, all that kind of stuff. You know what the end result was? Everybody was slightly pissed off, including us. And I think what it resulted in, though, is a way to operate the river system that has now lasted for well over a decade, because we balanced everybody's interests and needs, and everybody recognized it wasn't about TVA or just us. It was about the fact that, well, okay, I want a beautiful lake home, or I want weeds because I'm a fisherman, or no, I don't want weeds because I like to water ski. Right? They all got to have that conversation amongst themselves and come to some level of agreement. We're starting down that same kind of path in the energy space, but because energy is not as evolved as where the other was, it's taking a little bit of time. And it'd be really easy to get everybody in a room and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, except there's still those disruptive companies out there, and they're still working, right? So they've got new things coming and new technologies, and things keep changing. So it's an incredibly dynamic environment to be in. All right, so I'm almost done. When I come back and I think about this group, it's like, okay, well, why do any of you care about any of this? Well, it seems to me you ought to care for a couple of very important reasons. Number one, I've seen a lot of the companies down here and the things that you work on, and you're some of these disruptors. And I actually think that's a good thing. And there's an opportunity here for you to help really shape where this goes. And then secondly, why you should care comes back to my last point, is, how should I say this? Teslas of the world, the Googles of the, I like all those companies, they're good companies. But they're not in the local communities. They're not community companies. They're not valley companies. And as we put these technologies in place, as we make this stuff happen, it needs to happen in a way that is valuable to the people of the valley. And so when you think about the things you're developing and the things that you're implementing, think about, how does this affect everybody? And don't get me wrong, back to where you are, you got to make money for your business, but how do we do that in a way that's valuable for everyone? And I hope I can come back and talk to you again in another year or so, and this journey will be a little further down the path, because that's exactly what it is a journey. I guess with that, I don't any questions. Yes, sir.
Hey, good morning. My name is Ruchi Gupta with Singhal Solutions. My question is, with TVA being a semi-government, the question is that with the TVA being a non-for-profit government organization, and the head of innovation, when you work with other large corporations that are for-profit, and how do you collaborate? Because your vision may be slightly different from other for-profit companies. So how do you kind of navigate the challenges to bring everybody kind of on the same board?
Yeah, so that's really easy. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
That's actually the hard part, right? Because you have to recognize, and I'm sure you all do, right? Anybody that's got a new technology they're trying to sell, they're trying to do that to make their business function run profitable, right? So, you know, we recognize that. What we try to do is say, look, we're willing to help figure out how you get there, but you've got to be able to show a path to being competitive with what the system is in an existing way, right? Now, the interesting part about what I just said is we have to think about that system a little bit differently, and we're learning how to do that. But at the same time, and this is kind of my thing I've had with rooftop solar for a long time as an example, rooftop solar is massively expensive relative to the benefits that everybody gets. If I pay a huge subsidy and I pay a huge premium to that owner of that solar panel, it's great for the solar company, it's great for that owner. Everybody in here is paying for it because of the way our system works. I mean, a for-profit utility, maybe not. Shareholders might be paying for it. But in our system, all of the ratepayers are paying for it. So I'm very sensitive to doing that. Now, but if you can, in your development process, can say, okay, yeah, we're up here, but you know, if we get into these built and we get them in, you know, costs get down here, which is kind of Tesla's model and where they're going with the storage. That's good. We want to invest in that. We want to work toward getting that, but you got to be able to show that pathway that you're going to get competitive to the actual grid system.
What are the disruptive changes we can expect to see in 5 or 10 years as residential, commercial, or industrial customers?
Gee whiz. So I think I'll start with the easy ones. I think for industrial customers and maybe the large commercial, I do believe CHP, combined heat and power, it is going to be a pretty strong game changer for them, and well, coupled with efficiency, right? And efficiency. When I get talking about this, my head just automatically goes, you're still doing all the efficiency stuff, right? But efficiency is important. You got to be doing energy efficiency, but you fundamentally need to, CHP I think will be, and it's interesting because the United States never went down this road. If you think about Europe, most of Europe is on some sort of combination electricity, sort of central steam system, either large scale or medium scale. US never went down that road for the most part, but we're kind of coming back to it because it's certainly much more thermodynamically efficient to be going down those systems. Commercial, boy, that's tough. I think to some degree demand response, but probably most importantly is going to be lighting and motors. So not very sexy, but as we move to LED lighting, so here's an example. We've lost almost 2% of our load in the last 6 years, and our guys have been really working hard to figure out why. And there's a number of reasons, but the biggest number one contributor is the shift in lighting. And that's just the shift. That's really what we've seen so far is the shift going to compact fluorescence. The LED lighting is just really getting underway. And so I think you'll see a fairly significant change. And then there's new standards coming out for motors that I think will significantly change those. Residential, it's a little bit less clear. There are some very new cool technologies that are becoming affordable, like variable speed heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, the actual controlling your house technologies. The problem in the residential space is, how many of you wake up in the morning and just say, gee, let's go change out our air conditioning system, right? You don't decide to do that until the technician comes in and says, this sucker's dead, right? You've got to have a new one. So the problem in the residential space is new housing might get all this, but all the existing stuff, it's a very slow path because most of us don't replace that kind of stuff, and we probably shouldn't until it really needs replacing.
Joe, I've got a quick question going back to solar. I may disagree with you on the cost of rooftop solar. I think it's actually come down quite a bit more.
Oh, it has. I agree with that.
And but the new TVA incentives are really not really incentives. They're paying the retail rate at the 50 KW, the community solar is a little bit of an incentive in community solar, and of course the larger ones are negotiating. Do you see there continuing to be a program in the out years for that type of, we call it incentive by paying the retail rate, or effectively net metering in the out years, or is this basically TVA now is going to kind of shift away and say, okay, if it comes online, or we'll work with you in a net metering fashion, I guess is where I'm going for. And for the smaller array, less than 100 kW.
So the price, as you said, has come down, for all of it's come down. But I can get a utility scale facility for less than 4 cents kW. That's competitive with my normal generation. Community solars now are down into the 6 cent range. So that's darn close. And there's a lot of creativity. Somebody forgot who made the announcement earlier. There's a lot of creativity about third-party financing and how that's working. I think in the next few years, you're going to see community solar kind of facilities much better. And quite frankly, it's better for the system, because if I put a community solar system, everybody's getting some value out of that, right? And we're actually doing some work with EPRI on how do we best locate those to maximize the value in a distribution system. When I get to a rooftop solar, right, you're the only one really getting the value out of it, the owner of that rooftop system. And it's still, 10, 11 cents depending on where you're at and what the incentives look like. So we don't really see the value in continuing to pay that differential incentive for your personal value. Again, back to our motive from a nonprofit standpoint. We're working on the pricing structures for all of the electricity that would allow that kind of thing to happen, and we wouldn't care whether it's there or not. But we probably won't continue to incentivize that long term. Now, we've gone down to retail, and we'll probably stay there for another year or so, just simply because we're all trying to figure this out. And like I said, we really don't not like solar, but we're just trying to be fair and equitable with folks.
Sir, here. How do you see the battery having an impact, especially on the residential? Battery technology got better, they're able to store energy at home. Would that be a game changer?
Yes. So, yeah, storage is a great one, actually. That's not quite there, right? And again, you talk about Tesla and you talk about their push, right? Their Powerwall that they came out with. That was very cool. And it made a lot of people think, but Powerwalls aren't very useful. The problem with a Powerwall is if you lose power in your home, a Powerwall doesn't help you. I mean, it turns your lights on. But right, if you think about your air conditioner or heater or refrigerator, right, when you very first turn that motor on, right, so a house is somewhere 6 kilowatt range, but for about 100 milliseconds or so, when that motor starts, you're at 13, 14 kilowatts. So a Powerwall won't run your air conditioner, won't run your refrigerator, some of those kind of things. But what it did do was it made the other battery companies go, whoa, wait a minute, Tesla's getting out in front of us. And so now they're really beginning to think about, how do I manage that in the house? That's made the costs come down even more. So it's moving in the right direction. If you could get a battery in the home, a good electronic system to manage the power, and a solar panel or whatever, yeah, you could theoretically get really close to going off the grid. If we eventually get to that, I think then that becomes a real question. The dilemma, and I still have this person, because I actually like that whole concept, so careful how I'm saying this, but I've had to call a repairman to fix my heater and fix my whatever, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but yeah, we'll be there next Tuesday at 9 o'clock, right? Well, it's Tuesday at 9 o'clock ain't gonna work if my battery and solar panel's gone down. So I think what that means is most people are still gonna want their wire connected, but now how do we keep the prices associated with that wire being connected affordable? And that's the challenge we're trying to think
You talked a little bit about the solar program changes. Can you talk a little bit about where you see efficiency programs changing over maybe the next, say, 18 to 24 months with what you guys offer?
Well, you know, we've got a number of programs that are in play. You know, when we did the last IRP, which was about going on 2.5 years ago, right? We actually looked at energy efficiency as a resource, and we put that in play, and it's done very well. Now we have an interesting thing going on from our perspective. All this stuff we've been talking about, we're flat. There's no load growth going on. And so, you know, bottom line is we don't really need energy efficiency, right? Of course, then people say, well, you can retire plants. Well, we just did. We got 6,000 megawatts of coal plants we just retired. The rest of the assets are pretty valuable. And oh, by the way, if we have one of these really cold plunges that comes down, you need all those assets, so they can't go away. So now how do we think about energy efficiency in that kind of environment, right? When you're in a growing environment, energy efficiency is easy, right? It actually helps us because it avoids fuel costs, it avoids us having to build in generation. So we're in the process right now of trying to evaluate where energy efficiency can still have the best value in that sort of environment. Some real obvious places that I think we will definitely continue to focus is in low income space, right? Because as these new technologies come on, whether they're solar, whether whatever, I don't care what they are, just the added complexity, no matter how cost effective they are, is probably going to push prices up to a certain degree. You know, look at other parts of the country. Look at California, look at New York, right? We pay on average 8 to 9 cents in the valley. California's up to 28, 29 cents on average. New York is up in the almost 30. So prices are going to get pushed up. So now if you think about that, then the place energy efficiency becomes really valuable is those folks that don't have the ability to participate in all these other technologies. So I think that will clearly be a focus point. Beyond that, we're still really trying to think through where it is. And it's obviously very different whether you're talking about residential, commercial, or industrial, right? And commercial and industrial, they got bottom line incentives to go there, and I think they will continue to go there regardless of what we do. Okay.
On the commercial front, come back to the commercial front for a moment. You were talking about how you have the RA 100, the RA 350. I'm sure that besides Walmart, there's a number of representatives of that group in the Tennessee Valley area, service area. So what again is, could you recap what TVA's policy is toward those?
So we're working that out at the moment. And we're not the only ones. Everybody else is, all the other utility jurisdictions are trying to figure out how to help these folks as well. They are growing. So, you know, the RA 100 was 100 companies. So, you know, everything from Walmart to Target to Home Depot, Lowe's, all the big box stores are part of that. They're actually, like I said, to the RA, I call it 350 now. That's not officially what they're called, but there's about 350 that have signed up for that. So they're using their buying power to push us into dealing with that. And it's happening in different ways in different parts of the country. A model that is becoming fairly regular is a utility will put in a large-scale solar facility. They will assign the rights to that solar facility to Walmart or whoever. Walmart gets to take credit for this facility, et cetera. And then Walmart pays some level of premium for the ability to be able to do that. Whether that's going to be how it works in the valley or not, I don't know, but we're working on that right now.
Jim, I've got a question.
Okay.
Two questions. One, you mentioned gas a couple of times. Curious about how TVA is deploying or using, taking advantage of the natural gas prices. And the second question has to do with how can Energy Huntsville and our members participate in this open forum that you talked about in terms of getting information to you that affects decisions you make in the future?
Okay. So first one on gas. So the IRP that we did said we still needed a balanced portfolio, right? Because at the end of the day, you keep costs the lowest when you've got the ability to move around in the most efficient generation source depending on what's happening in the market. So we said we got to keep coal, nuclear, gas, renewables, hydro, et cetera. Well, we said we needed to pick up on gas. So we're in the process of building several thousand megawatts of combined cycle. Putting in a gas combined cycle plant up in Kentucky at our Paradise facility. We'll be retiring 2 of the coal units out where that is. We're also building a large gas plant over in Memphis. We'll be retiring the Allen unit over there. Interesting side note, the original Allen plant was designed to run off gas, and in the 40s got converted to coal. 50s, I guess, got converted to coal. And so, yeah, now we're going back to gas. We're not doing it in the old plant because it's way too inefficient. But that gets us a little more balance in our portfolio. So, you know, you won't see us go to all gas. We still believe there will be volatility in the gas market over time. We still think coal is a good resource if it's used properly. So you're going to see that in the portfolio. But obviously the renewables and that stuff you're going to continue to see grow. In terms of input, several ways. Certainly you can always send me or my staff stuff. We're working on right now a plan on how we're going to better engage folks. You know, we committed to we would kind of get back into the IRP space somewhere around 2019, but we got to think about, okay, when we ran the IRP last time, we added energy efficiency as a resource and figured out how to do that. We don't know yet how to add all this other stuff. So we're trying to figure out how to make our models work differently, but we're also trying to begin to figure out how to get input from folks about what's out there, what's available, what works. So you'll see more of that as we kind of get the plan figured out, but we're just kind of in the beginning stages of that right now.
Last question. Yes, your commercial energy right solution incentive, you see that go on after this year you're finishing up?
So I don't know that it's going to change, but I don't know as I said, we're reevaluating kind of where we are, but at this point I don't know of any specific changes we're going to be making.
Jerry, thank you for that question about getting engaged. I'd like to offer Energy Huntsville to you as a resource if you need a community group to get input from and test drive your questions or your sessions. I'm sure everyone in this room would like to do that.
Okay.
And at this point, it's top of the hour. We can keep talking, but I want to make sure that people who need to leave feel comfortable doing so. And thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're going to hang around for a little bit.
We had a good Energy Huntsville meeting here today. We're excited that we were able to go Facebook Live with it. This will stay posted on the Nexus Energy Center Facebook, and you can keep commenting on there. We'll try to get you answers as much as you want. We appreciate Dr. Hoagland's talk today, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. Thanks.
That's always good.